Okay, so you guys just have to probably accept that. Oh, maybe you don't. Okay. All right, cool. So first of all, I'm really excited that you guys are here because I think it's a wonderful workshop, and it's something that I wanted to do because in my conversations with so many different people, getting this like, oh, I got to get this straightened out, or I need to just, figure out what to do about this, or I'm at this crossroads, and nobody really has, there's no guide to like how to do that. Like, what are we going to do? And so I think
Let
we're
me
all just
interrupt.
like,
Anne, I'm interrupting you because someone just said the passcode's not working. I did not need a passcode, but someone just sent a text saying the passcode.
oh, it's Rachel. Yes. Try again because that's what I used. All right. So, but I didn't, I mistyped it the first time. So let's see if she gets in. I think that's Rachel. So her AC guy is, I'm going to just send her a quick invite just to make sure she is on the right thing. Okay. All right.
And then could I mention one more thing?
Yeah,
my friend Jen's in the background. We're sharing office space. We're on the Vineyard, but she's
Oh,
slightly
nice.
intrigued, so she may end up jumping on the bandwagon.
Oh my God, absolutely.
She's
Grab
working.
a journal. Grab a journal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my dog. And her dog. Okay, sorry.
Okay, let me just ask, I sent an invite.
Hello?
Brian was my phone.
Okay. All right, there we go. Okay, so let's see. Let's hope she gets in with that information. And let me switch back over to where I was. So, okay, where was I? I was just welcoming everybody and saying like why I think this is like fantastic because we're like, oh, I got to get it together. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll try a few things. And then we're not very successful. And then we're like, I just can't get it together. And we wind up blaming ourselves about all of this stuff. And so Paul and I, oh, here she is. Yay. Okay. Paul and I went through a certification last year, and we learned a lot of great stuff that, in our coaching, if you've been working with us this year, we've been trying to incorporate. And then this summer, I thought it would be a really good idea. And if you hear, by the way, my New York accent, it's because I was hanging out with all of my college roommates who are from New York City. So if that slips out, I'm blaming it on them. So anyway, we learned a lot of like concrete strategies that we like to implement. It's part of our program. But I wanted to do sort of like just an intensive because sometimes people aren't super interested or don't even really need to think about fitness or nutrition or other things, but they do need to, or they just need to do this mindset piece, and then everything else will kind of fall into place. And I know you guys read my initial email, and that just kind of like explained, like, nobody really wants to say the word mindset. We don't know what it is, or like mental hygiene. It's all weird, and we want to avoid that too. So the intention here, our objectives here are to just get some concrete strategies. The format that we're going to follow for the next 4 weeks, I just want to kind of walk you through what to expect, is that we'll jump on here every Monday, up to an hour. We have to, I'll present whatever we're going to be presenting, the strategy or the skill set. I'll give you guys your kind of like homework and assignments, and then we'll have an opportunity for like questions or shares or just comments. Okay. So that's how we'll kind of roll through. And I got to block my chat because when I'm trying to focus, I read everybody's comments and I'm like, okay. Anyway, all right. So somebody take notes for Rachel. She's the AC guy. Okay. So anyway, so congratulations for signing yourself up for this and welcome. I really think that, walking through this is going to be super beneficial in so many different ways. Okay. What I am going to ask, I do believe that I have everybody's email here. After our call today, I'm going to put you into our app group. Some of you are already in it or have access if you've done one of our programs. If you haven't, or if you have, I'll just, turn yours back on, reactivate you. And this way we have a group app where you guys can all chat. If you have questions about the assignments or you just have some shares and comments, it's nice to always just keep that going in the group. I will say there's a few other people who are not able to make the live call. So you'll see them in the group. Once I create the group, I'll kind of tag everybody in it so that you guys can Well, who'd we lose, Kim? I'll tag everybody in there so you know who's in the group and who you're talking to. Okay. All right. So I will do that later this afternoon. We're gonna do, so we'll have our call, and then I'll just, while you guys are there, if you guys don't mind just muting yourselves. And then when we do like the Q&A, you guys can come off mic, just because sometimes like moving stuff, I do the same thing too. And I hate, and then I'm like, oh, was that me? I'm like, I was like being disruptive. So just put yourselves on mute. And then when we have, if you want to open up your mic to ask a question, please do. Okay. This way you don't have to sit so quietly. You can kind of make noise. It won't be a problem. So we'll do our Q&A on Mondays at 1 o'clock. And then I'll give you guys some assignments to kind of build on the strategies that we learn. And then I want to do a check-in on either Thursday or Friday with you guys, 10 or 15 minutes, just to kind of touch base and see if we are, if you're on the right track, if you need extra support, if you're not really clear, or if you're just like, oh my God, I'm crushing this, yay. So any of those things. So let me know, submit to me 3 times that work. So between Thursday 1 and 3 or 6 and 7:30 p.m.s. Those are both PMs. So if you've got any availability in there, just send me some times, and I'm just going to work everybody's schedule so we can all check in. If none of those work, I have some time Tuesday between 2 and 5. Okay. So just shoot me like, maybe like 3 options that work for you. Just like for 10 or 15 minutes, we can just jump on a quick call and kind of just check in. Okay. All righty. All right. So does anybody have, that was just kind of like housekeeping welcome. Anybody have any questions about what I just said? My teaching says I'm supposed to give you guys 10 seconds for your questions. You guys are all, a lot of teachers on here too. Is that right? Is it still 10 seconds? Okay. So what we're going to talk about today here is like, no matter where you are, I want to just make it clear that, in mindset and things that we're going to do, you're here because you want to bump up in something, right? So we want to bump up no matter what level you're at. So there's no comparison here. And part of what you might work on is how not to be comparative to the person, next to you, living next to you, any of that business, right? So comparison is the thief of joy. Right. So we don't want to compare who's at what level. We're all at our own level, but we are going to bump up from the level that we're on. Okay. So I want to kind of just talk today a little bit about where we start out with our health goals. And we never really get any training. And that's like, if you're on in the beginning of the call, that's kind of what I was talking about, is that we're just kind of like winging it. We're like, I don't know, I got to get healthier. I need to do these things. I read this online. And nobody ever really teaches us, like problem solving, unless like we're taking a problem solving class, maybe it's a college level or something. But as we're growing up, nobody really, we don't really have a formal way to understand problem solving for many of us. Some do, but I think a lot of us go through life without that. So what we want to try to do is that we're trying to get ourselves healthier. We want to understand how do we train our brain to figure that out. Okay. So, and a lot of you guys know I've done Ironman, right? So it's a giant race. It's a swim, bike, run, 140.6 miles long. It's I think it's super fun. A lot of people think I'm insane, but that's why we don't compare. Right? But I will tell you right now, if somebody, I've done many Ironman, but if somebody told me, and go do an Ironman today, I couldn't do it. And if I could do it, it would likely be super painful. I might not finish. I would have a really bad experience. Okay. And the reason why I bring this up is because I want to just, remind you guys is that when we're doing this stuff, it's training, right? You have to, and when you fall out of training, it's like you don't have the skill, right? So I can train myself to do an Ironman again, sure. But if I went to go do one right now, it wouldn't go very well. So the same thing sort of applies when we're talking about our mindset with our mental hygiene. It's something that we need to train. We need to develop skills. And when we get out of routine, we have skills to fall back on to get us back to where we were. Okay. So that's kind of, one of the things just to, just think about. I see a lot of times people like, oh, I used to be able to do this and now I can't. And then he said, well, have you consistently been practicing or training? Well, no, I haven't really been able to get disrupted. And is that, well, okay, then that makes sense. Right. So, and then we wind up beating ourselves up because we can't do it. Right. But we kind of, we let go of the training a little bit. So we don't need to be beating ourselves up. We just need to recognize that these are things that we need to do. And we need to be consistent. And when we get interrupted with that consistency, we want to get back on. And if we're not, maybe we're not going to the gym or we're not prepping our food or we're just, usually, and I think we're going to talk about this maybe next week. One of the big things that I always, is kind of like my kryptonite is the time space continuum, right? I always think, I don't have enough time. I have plenty of time. I get the same amount of time as every other human being on the planet, 24 hours, right? We all have the same amount of time. It is not about not having enough time. It is about clearing enough mental space. Okay. So I'm just going to drop that out there. That's not super what we're going to be talking about today, but we're going to be talking about that. I think in the next week, we'll be talking about how do we get that. Okay. So the first thing that I wanted to kind of dive into today is kind of destigmatizing, mental health, mindset, mental hygiene. What are these words? They're not really scary. Okay. I want you guys to just think about whatever field. I tend to always kind of go with football because I love football. So I always use Tom Brady. And if you live outside of New England, you'll find that the rest of the country really hates him. I always think that's really funny. I get in like all my other, places and I'm like, Tom Brady, they're like, dark guys, whatever. So anyway, so I use Tom Brady or I use Michael Phelps because I just have read a lot about Michael Phelps, who's an Olympic swimmer, won 21 gold medals in one of the Olympics. And he's done a lot of work in mental hygiene to get himself mentally prepared. But it doesn't need to be sports related. It can be, if you've got somebody who's a concert pianist, or somebody who is a surgeon, or a mom who just needs to get her family sorted out for the day. Whatever it is that you're doing, we're going to have, if you're at the top of your game, there's no chance that you are not doing some mental preparation to get yourself ready for the task at hand. And I use like the sports guys or like professional people because they are at the top of their game and that's what they're doing. And I think sometimes we're like, oh, but I'm not going to be, I'm not going to win the Olympics. I'm not going to get a gold medal. So I don't really need to do all that. And so I had a quote this week in one of my social media posts that says, I don't mind being mediocre, but I dream of being extraordinary. So if you guys have ever, and I do this probably, I don't know how many times a day, but a lot, I'll be out running. I see myself win the Boston Marathon or the New York City Marathon or an Ironman or just people cheering for me. And it helps make me feel good. It helps my run go a lot better. And in my head, I'm extraordinary. Right. And so what we don't want to do is as we go through our day is accept things that are going to allow us to just be mediocre when we have all of these great things that we feel and that we want. And typically when we talk about things that are in our way, that is a big piece of it. And what we think in our head and what we can execute, right? And there's the disconnect. So hopefully the objective is by the time we get to the end of this workshop, you will have a connection between those two things. It won't be disconnected, okay? So, said a lot with my so I know I told Chris before some of you were jumping on, I was in Nashville for the weekend, which is the most insane place, which is I lived in New York City for like 20 years. This is the most insane place I've ever been. I'm told like Mardi Gras doesn't even come close to Nashville. I believe it. So I'm a little hoarse today because everywhere you go, it's amazing. Everybody's a performer and they're just musical events on like everything is like 4 or 5 stories with rooftop decks and each level is a different band. But in order to communicate with the people that you were with, you have to yell over the band. So I'm a little bit hoarse today, but I had a wonderful experience with all of these people. And if you have a chance to go to Nashville, I strongly recommend it. Just walk around downtown and just be blown away by like the insanity that's going on. It starts at like 9 in the morning, or I don't even know if it ends, but it gets going. Okay, so I want to introduce a concept to you guys, and this is going to be kind of like the last piece that I'm going to go to before I give you guys our assignments, and then I open it up for questions. I'm going to talk about the 4 A's. Okay, so go figure, they're going to be 4 words. They all start with A, 4 of them. And they kind of go with a phase of what we're gonna, of what we hope to move through, or at least begin, because you can't really do this whole process in 4 weeks, but I want to give you guys the tools to get you going. So in the first stage, when we're trying to change something and we're trying to look at our mindset, we call it the unconscious incompetence, right? You don't know what you don't know, right? You don't really recognize that you have a deficit in a certain area. And you may often think like, oh, I don't really need to learn all that. That's not for me, right? I don't know what the worth of learning or knowing that information or whatever. And that's kind of the unconscious incompetence, okay? And it's safety. You have accepted, number 1, acceptance. You have accepted being there, okay? Unconscious incompetence, okay? And we're gonna progress this. There's 4 of these that go with the 4 A's, okay? So in order to kind of move forward, we have to have a recognition of this incompetence. And we have to kind of think like, oh, maybe there is some worth to learning something if I want to move forward. So we move into a phase called conscious incompetence. So now we're aware. That's A, number 2. We're aware, we're conscious, but we still don't have the skills because we just became aware of it, okay? Sometimes we can become really frustrated in this phase because we're now aware of it, but we don't have the skill set, okay? It's like, telling somebody, in first grade, like, hey, we want you to, go up to middle school and do some tasks up there, right? You just, like you're gonna get there, but you don't have any of the skill sets behind it, okay? So you start to fully recognize the deficits that you have. You might have a couple of aha moments like, oh God, I didn't even know I couldn't do that. And then, what did I just do? Okay. Oh, it was telling me something. I was going to run out. Okay. So we fully acknowledge that we need to learn this. Okay. And we're going to make some mistakes. So making mistakes is something that can be really hard if we're not accustomed to making mistakes, and we're the kind of person that can be really hard on ourselves. And we don't like mistakes. We don't want to admit that we have any faults. But this is kind of part of that learning process, is being willing to make the mistake and learning from it, okay? And taking the lesson from it. You don't want to be like, oh, whatever, I made a mistake, and just blow it off and move on. We want to be able to make that mistake without allowing it to crush our ego. I want to kind of like check that ego. That's another workshop. Ego is another one. And then we also kind of have this major lack of ability. We still have it, right? We still have it. We still know it. So as I said, we could be frustrated. There could be some doubt, uncertainty. We start to overthink everything. It might start to be a little bit scary. And the thing that I want you to start to think about in this phase is, what is our story? Okay. What has gotten us to this place? And that might not make 100% sense to you right now, but just start to think like, what is my story? What is the story that I'm telling? So some of you have a little bit of preconceived, what is that? Because you've worked with us before. And we always talk about the truth you tell, right? The truth you tell is the story that you know, and it's the story that the world knows. Okay. So what is your story? Okay. What is the story that you are telling yourself? Okay. Because whatever it is, that's what you're living. Okay. If it's, it's not a story that you like, well, we'll get to that. We're gonna change it. All right. So your next step here, we're going to come into accountability, where you start to be accountable for all of these things. We call it conscious competence. You are aware, you are starting to build some skills here. We start to feel good. We start to have some self-esteem. Now we know, okay, the conscious concentration is vital. We have to understand, we have to practice those skills, like I said. Mistakes are corrected without feeling like, oh my God, I made a mistake, or like, oh, I got to avoid that. That was a mistake. We face those mistakes head on as factual, and we try to problem solve. And again, this is a pivotal piece of the process, is learning how to problem solve without allowing the voice to say like, oh, I made a mistake, or no, we don't need to know that. You got to come into the middle here and work through that mistake and understand like, the mistake is not a judgment of who you are. This is how we're going to make some change. Okay. And then in this phase, we'll see that like these steps can often correct it. Okay. And you might be in that phase for a little bit. The last stage that we're going to talk about is the unconscious competence. You just do things without even thinking about it. It's an adaptation. Okay. We call it actualization. We can now do things without thinking about it. They just start to come naturally. And maybe they start to come naturally like 1 time out of 10, 2 times out of 10, until you arrive at like, I don't know. I don't want to throw judgment on there. It starts to become more and more and more. I think that when you do this for years, you can get close to 8 or 9. Okay. It starts to become easy. You might start to feel a little bit less stressed in your world. It can be taught, right? So we can taught. So we think about those 4 A's: acceptance, we accept where we are, we don't know anything. Awareness, we start to become conscious of these things. And we start to be accountable, and then we start to adapt. Okay, so the 4 A's, that's what we want to be thinking about. So I know you guys all have your journals. I know you've all written those down. Acceptance, awareness, accountability, and adaptation. Okay. All right. So before I go in and give you guys your weekly assignment, which some of you I think already have a jump start on, but we're going to explore it a little bit more deeply, and to some of you it will be new. Does anybody have any questions on the 4 A's, that whole, conscious, unconscious, competence, incompetence? How'd that go for everybody? Any questions around that? All right. You guys are either super shy or you're like, oh, this is going to be cake. Okay.
I'll ask, Anne. So, I mean, you're talking about just, I don't want to call it personality flaws, but your bad habits, or like, right? Obviously, we're talking in abstract, but we're just talking about just us as humans, right? And just knowing what gets in our way right? Just trying to kind of put it to, layman's terms.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what it is?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Like as you start to think about you could start to think about, some things that are in your way. And as you start to become aware of them, you might start to also think like, oh, you know what else I'm doing as it turns out? And then you start to become a little bit more aware. And I think they would just be, if you start to think about those things, Kim, more as like, you know what, I'm making these choices that don't align with my goals. Right. Mm-hmm. So instead of saying like, I want to try to get you into a place where it becomes changeable, right? We can adapt it. Like there's nobody on the face of this planet. Well, okay, not nobody, that's strong. Like maybe a few, if we've got some significant cognitive issues, but nobody cannot adapt. Right. And I think so oftentimes, we all know like these sayings, they don't just, they're not just like these teabag sayings. I always get them off the tea bags. Right. But, we always say like, if you think that you can't, well, then you're right. Right. Whether you can, you think you can or you can't, you're right. So it's the power of what you believe, and it's the story that you tell yourself. So if you're thinking like, oh, I just have this thing, I've always done it, you're likely to never change that. Right. Yeah. But if you look at that same thing and you might say like, oh, you know what, I do this and it doesn't really line up with my goals. I wonder what's behind that. Why do I constantly choose that? Right. And you can start to go through these 4 stages with that. Right. Yeah. So just start to think of it like that with a little bit more, fluidity. Yeah, absolutely. Good question. Good question. Okay. Okay. Anybody else have a question? Okay. All right. I have 2 assignments for you. One is, we call it your daily wins. So some of you that have worked with us before, you know exactly what that is. This is a reprogramming and a reframing. It is step one to get our negative narrative to take a back seat to the positive. So at the beginning of the day or at the end of the evening, you want to focus and write down 5 things that were wins for you. They don't need to be gigantic wins. They need to be like, I woke up today. I got out of bed. I took the dog for a walk, right? I showed up on time when I said I was going to, when I knew it was really hard, right? Whatever it is, the win doesn't need to be huge. And I think sometimes, a lot of times people are looking for big wins. You just need things that you've done well, and you want to train your brain to focus on those and write those down, okay? So we're just trying to get that negative narrative to take a back seat, okay? Okay. Everybody understand wins? Okay, all right. I'm going to tell you guys, I got one more assignment for you, but I am on, as it turns out, I am on the account that is our not paid for account. I just realized that now. And so I am going to get disconnected from you guys in less than 1 minute. So I don't want that to happen. We're going to get disconnected. Everybody just log right back in, and then I'm going to upgrade this account so that we don't have this issue moving forward. So everybody's going to get bumped out. We're just going to log back in. Okay. All right. I'm sorry.